One of the difficult things about studying Kabbalah, if you want to study it seriously, is like any incredibly complex topic, it really requires consistency. You know, to do what we're trying to do, it's really really hard to take them whatever. What has it been, a month, 3 weeks, and then with of a gap, and then to jump back in is not ideal. But we'll use this session to review a little bit, a lot of bit of what we've done, because it is incredibly complex. So we are in the second sphere, or the second sphera from the top down, or as in his book, we're in the ninth gate. So again, his first gate is Malchut. Hold on here. His first gate is called Malchut, and he works his way up there. So the second gate is Yesod, the third gate is Netzach, the fourth gate is, excuse me, the third gate is Hod, the fourth gate is Netzach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the ninth gate, but it's the second sphera from the top, which is Keter. So in other words, it is Chokhmah. And what do we remember about Chokhmah? Even if you just have like the vaguest, like a word or concept, anything, intimation, just to get the conversation started. What is Chokhmah?
Wisdom.
Okay, it's usually translated as wisdom. What does that mean in the context of the Kabbalah?
It's sort of an unformed sort of burst of inspiration that hasn't been turned into discrete thoughts yet.
Right, that's right. And the analogy, which I think Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan makes in his book, oh gosh, I can never remember the name. Oh, there it is, Inner Space. Hold on. Inner Space by Aryeh Kaplan. By the way, when you're looking at this, is it backwards? Okay, good. So anyway, Inner Space by Aryeh Kaplan. Gabriel Goldfeder recommended this book to me, by the way, Lenny. It's,
I had a class from him this morning already.
Oh, you did? Cool. Yeah. So this book is really good in terms of Kabbalistic books that are not, in terms of secondary sources. This is about the best secondary source in terms of just pure information about what the Kabbalah says. Sorry, I'm going around and muting everyone because I'm hearing an echo. So unless you're speaking, try to make sure that you stay on mute. In terms of secondary sources, this is about as good as it gets in terms of just raw material. He tries to present it as undistorted as he can. And he gives several useful analogies, and I don't know if this is original to him or not, but he, in that book, he compares Chokhmah to like when you have an idea. This unfortunately doesn't happen, at least for me, as much as I would like it to. You have just like a great idea, and you feel this sense of like, okay, I got it. I've been working on this problem, and boom, I got it. But you haven't really worked it out yet. You just sort of have this notion, and so in the analogy, the idea is that the whole solution to the problem is in your mind, but you haven't articulated it yet. Whether or not thought really works like that in the real world, I don't know, but that's the analogy. It's like, it's this yet unarticulated notion that you have, but you've got the answer in there. That is Chokhmah. So the result of that, practically speaking, what that means for Kabbalah is that we can't say so much about Chokhmah because it's not revealed to us, right? It's in God's mind. We begin to access the highest level when we do real deep teshuvah, which is associated with Binah, right? Teshuvah was the name of the sphere of Binah. And Binah and Chokhmah are adjacent in the spherotic tree. So like, and you also have to remember when you're looking at the spherotic tree and it has the two spherot next to each other, and they look like they're not connected. This is one of the things that's confusing about the tree of life. They look like they're not connected. They look totally discrete, but you have to remember that, well, actually it's probably like, if this is Chokhmah, which is correct from my side, but it'll be reversed on your side. If this is Chokhmah and this is Bina, it's something like that, right? Bina is actually emerging out of Chokhmah. All of the Sphirot are emerging one from the other. So Bina is the articulation of the thought. That is to say, Bina is the actual like plan for how the created world is going to express itself, but it emerges as a notion in Chokhmah. Okay, so now let's strive to make this actually more comprehensible and more useful to us. Let me just get back to my notes. It's so interesting, you know, as I've been away for so long, and then since I came back, I have been, you know, doing the normal teaching and talking that I do, and I can feel like my mind, you know, kind of like hitting the wall, because you're sort of like, we have to prepare ourselves to do such different kind of thinking, and it's so intense. It's so intense. So if you're feeling a little rusty on this stuff, it's okay. It's just a different way of moving through your mind and your soul. Okay, let me just get my notes here. Sorry. All right. Okay. So last time, I don't know if you remember this, that he, okay, so we've mentioned now in 2 different sessions, and now this will be the 3rd, that that Amalek represents not a historical figure, but this force trying to separate the conscious mind and the soul of the person from cleaving to God. So we'll just do this one more time and spend a little less time on it than we have in the past. When Amalek came, he intensified the blemish of the moon, and he struck the thigh, that is when it's not full, and he struck the thigh of Jacob, which therefore caused the crumbling in the house of David's kingdom. So again, as we've said, when you read the Torah, when the Kabbalists read the Torah, there's no chronology. They're not interested necessarily in David as the historical figure, because Amalek, Jacob, and David are all, while in the Torah, they're all wildly, hugely separated in time. But in the Kabbalah, that's not how you read the Torah, because the Torah is this secret code that this code that you can unpack if you know the secret. So Amalek strikes the thigh of Jacob. So if you remember when Jacob is wrestling with the angel and he walks away with a wound, Amalek wounded you, and Amalek wounded me, right? Because we don't cleave perfectly to Hashem. And in wounding us, we walk with a limp. We're imperfect, and so again, Amalek is this primal force, and he strikes the thigh of Jacob, and Jacob, Yisrael, the one who wrestles with God, bears that wound. I'm going to skip this part, but here is what I want to show you. Okay. So again, so now he goes to a different verse. Now he goes to the verse where we first meet Amalek in Exodus 17. Vayavo Amalek vayelachem im Yisrael birfidim. So when you're just reading this stam, you're just reading it normally on the Pshat, a guy named Amalek and his people came and they did war, vayelachem, with Israel in a place called Refidim. Okay, so the letter, the letter bet here is the preposition. Is that what I mean? Yes. The letter bet is the preposition, and the place name is just a place called Refidim. Okay, no great mystery. But the Talmud does a riff on it, and then we are going to explore what he means by what he thinks this riff means. The sages taught that the word Refidim, the place name, comes from Riffion Yadayim. So I'll do just at the risk of making this overly simple. Riffion Yadayim. Now the Gemara does this kind of wordplay does this kind of wordplay all the time, and it can be really hard to follow. So you just have to use your imagination, and if you ignore the Y-O-N, you say Ref Yadayim, which looks like Ref Yadayim, Refidim. Okay, so they're saying that the word Refidim stands for Refion Yadayim, which means weak hands. It says here weak hand. I think it means with weak hands. Okay, so just hold that idea in your mind, that the place name means weak hands, and I'll talk about the multiple levels of this in a moment, and then I'll pause for questions. Therefore, we say that the first snake and Amalek together hit the last two letters, which are Vav He. If you have no idea what's happening, that's okay, don't worry. And their hand had reached everything that was inside the name except for the letter Yud He. For they had no way of reaching the upper divine energy, for it resides above. Okay, so let's pause there. So let me just pause. Is this ringing a bell? Because we talked about this a little bit before. Okay, do I not need to belabor this, or is it okay to spend time on it? Okay, all right.
Please spend time on.
Yeah, right, okay. Okay, so let me just keep going here. So weak hands. Okay, so remember that the word, that the name Chokhmah, or the Sphira Chokhmah, one of its names, the main name in his telling is Yah. Okay, so when you're coming through the Torah and you see Hashem referred to as Yah, which happens sometimes, he says that means, that's referring to the aspect of Chokhmah, okay? That's Sphira. So, according to him, when Amalek came, Amalek was able to damage Vav He, all of the other Sphirot, but he could not damage Yud He. Yud He, remember the tip of the Yud is Keter, the body of the Yud is Chokhmah, the He is Bina. That cannot be affected by anything in the created world, right? It's like, I don't know, this is a bizarre analogy, but it's like you have a fire hydrant, and the fire hydrant is constantly gushing water, okay? And you attach a fire hose to it so you can direct the water to your proper uses. If in this analogy, the fire hose represents like the proper alignment of the creative world, so you can have the flow of divine energy channeled in a way that we can make use of it. If someone comes and attacks the fire hose and cuts it with a knife, or takes it off the fire hydrant and burns it and destroys it, you're not in a good way. The world is going to suffer. But the fire hydrant, this is where my analogy is not really great. The fire hydrant just remains there. The water's gushing out of it. Nothing can ever affect the fire hydrant. In the same way, Yud and He, this should give us hope, because no matter how screwed up the world gets, divine perfection is continuing to offer itself, so to speak, to blow into the world. And it's only the created world that can be disrupted, whose harmony can be disrupted. But Yud He, Yah is always there. Okay? So going back here, and then I'll pause. That's why he says that the first snake and Amalek hit the last two letters, the Vav He. They affected the reality of the created world. They disrupted the harmony. They broke us. They caused pain, which are Vav He. And they had reached everything that was inside the name except for Yud He. They have no way of reaching them. So let me pause there, because then he brings a verse to try to illustrate that. But I actually want to do something else with it. Let me pause. Questions? Give me a thumbs up if you're like, yeah, let's move on. Or raise your hand if you have a question.
No, don't move on.
Okay.
In that sentence, in the Hebrew sentence, is there a Yud Hey that's representing what?
Oh, in this verse?
Talking? Yeah.
No, great question. There's not. So that's where you're frozen there. Either that or you're just baffled in astonishment. There's no Yud Hey there. So he's sort of like combining ideas, right? Because remember that Yud Hey Vav Hey, it's confusing, because Yud Hey Vav Hey on the one hand is the most common name in the Torah, and it's just a name. On the other hand, it refers to all of reality. And so here he's using it in the context of, well, Amalek came and he affected reality, right? So that's why he's referring to Yud Hey. Can't affect that part of the universe. Can't affect the Yud Hey, because that's God's always doing that.
Okay. But it's not that finely coded in the letters.
Right. Right. All the 10
big
are in the 4-letter name. This hour of Kabbalah brought to you by Dr. Pepper. Lenny didn't like that for some reason. Okay. So, okay, now what I wanted to point out to you, here's one of the things that is so beautiful, both about the Gemara, the Talmud, because this part, Refayon Yadayim, the understanding of the place name Refidim as meaning weak hands. Here's why this is so beautiful. And I assume that he's doing this deliberately. In this part, and we may have touched on this last time. One second. I will, let me just get us to the verse. Okay, so here's the battle with Amalek. Here's the verse he's talking about. Vayavo Amalek v'yelechem Yisrael b'Refidim. Amalek came with and fought with Israel at Refidim. Whoops. And okay. And then in verse 12, so this is a little bit of a digression, but I think you'll find it worthwhile. So remember that when Moses is fighting when Israel is fighting the Amalekites, whenever Moses' arms are up, Israel wins, is victorious. And when he lets his arms down, Israel begins to lose to the Amalekites, to Amalek and the bad guys. And so, verse 12, Moses' hands grew heavy. That is, his arms were tired. He's like doing this to kind of show, to symbolize power and might. But you can't do this for so long. So his arms grow heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him. And he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sun set. Well, the word steady is emunah, right? Which is usually translated as faith. Ugh, I really don't like that feature. Emunah, which is usually translated as faith, but can also be, as you see here, steadfast or faithfulness. And so if you think about, his hands were held strong, they were supported, and you then fold that back into his idea that Refidim means weak hands. So the battle of faith, the battle of faith is a battle about Amalek. In other words, there's some force in the world that's constantly trying to tear us away and to make us not cleave and to do damage to the created world. But emunah is the struggle to bring harmony and healing to the world, and to not let Amalek break Vav He off of Yud He, right? So, in other words, when we say emunah, and this is really what I'm trying to say, let me state it more simply. Usually when we talk about, oh yeah, it's really, really important to have emunah, usually people think, well, many people believe that emunah means, I've got to believe that God exists, or I have to believe in these things about God, or I have to believe that, God is good. It is that, but it's a much, much deeper and more powerful, which is that it's the struggle to keep going and trying to unify the lower world with the upper world, trying to bring harmony to, and to get back to the source of all things. So I wanted to give you that because I think it's an implicit teaching, or he's alluding to the idea of emunah with the word weak hands, because emunah is in opposition to weak hands, if that made sense. Sarah.
Since I don't believe that any line or word in the Torah is there by mistake, what is the significance of the fact that he sat on a stone?
That's a good question. I don't know. Whoops, where'd it go?
I'm wondering if it lifted him so that they could get under his arms.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Just curious.
Yeah, I think what I think on the shot level, what I think is happening is that I guess, yeah, I'm not sure why they do it. Like, why does he need to sit on the stone for them to hold his arm? I don't know on the shot. I don't know. Lenny?
Could you say that it was that battle was exhausting even for Moshe, that his arms needed to be held up?
Right. The battle, right? The larger spiritual battle. Right. Yep, that's right. That's actually, that's a really nice kind of Musardic, Kabbalistic take on, a Musar take on the Kabbalah, which is that, we need, it's hard. This is a hard battle to fight. In addition to that, though, there's a whole other level where we're not going to go, which is that Aaron represents Hod, and Moses is associated with Netzach. Hur, I'm not sure what to do with, but so in that scene, you actually have the alignment of Netzach and Hod, those two sfirot. But that's another conversation. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay. All right, so now we're going to a separate teaching. Why doesn't somebody read this guy? This paragraph. Somebody want to read there? Sorry, I'm just going to remind us that we're talking about Chokhmah. Oh, you can't see what I can see, can you? Sorry. Okay. Somebody want to read this? Know that the Sphira?
Sure. Know that this Sephira, Chokhmah, is referred to in the Torah as Yesh, being, there is, and you must realize the reason. The first Sephira is Keter, which is hidden from all living things, and no one may even contemplate it, for it is called Ayin, nothing. If one comes to ask if it's something, the answer will be Ayin, meaning that if there is no one who can contemplate the essence of its depth and grandeur. Thus, it is not symbolized by a specific letter, but only by the crown on the letter Yud. It is the origin of...
Let's pause there for a minute. Just read back over this, because this is so. This is a very important point. Just read over it silently to yourself. So this paragraph is really not about our sphira. It's not about Chokhmah. He's really helping you understand Chokhmah in contrast to Keter. And we have not studied Keter yet in his book. We haven't studied the chapter on Keter. Keter is called Ein or Ayin sometimes. So it's interesting because remember, I'm not sure if you remember, but I think I've shared with you that what is above all of the Sefirot? What is God's true essence called? What do we call it? Anybody remember?
Ein Sof.
Yeah, it's Ein Sof. Ein Sof, which ooh, that's a big note to myself. So Ein Sof, well, I guess if I'm following their how they're writing it, it would be Ein Sof, right? Which means it's translated as infinite, but it literally means without end. Okay, same thing. Infinite literally means without end. So now Keter, even though Keter is so high and above our capacity to contemplate, it's still very far from being Ein Sof, okay? Because it begins to relate to creation. And what's interesting though, that the name of Keter is Ein, nothing. That's one of the names of Keter, Ein or Ayin, nothing. So even the name itself, this is why the Kabbalah is just so fascinating and so ingenious in terms of its terminology. The name itself, on the one hand, it has a meaning, which I'll talk about in a moment. There's a reason it is called nothing, Keter. On the other hand, the name itself indicates that it has a connection to Ein Sof, right? Now let's talk about why it is called nothing. Well, the answer that he gives here is, there's an expression in the Talmud. If a teacher gives an overly simple answer to somebody, the Gemara says that he pushed him away with a reed. And this is like a trope in the Gemara, like a Roman will come up and challenge one of the great rabbis in the presence of his students. Hey, why did your God do this? And he doesn't want to really reveal to the Roman like the real essence, and so he'll give him like a kind of weak answer. And for the Roman, in the rabbinic imagination, for the Roman, it's like that's good enough answer, and walks away. And then the students will say to the rabbi, why did you push him away with a reed? In other words, why didn't you lay like the real truth on him? Why did you give him that not great answer? I feel like he's giving us a reed of an answer here, R-E-E-D, as to why Keter is called Ein. He says it's called Ein because if you ask what is it, the answer is Ein. The answer is nothing. No one can contemplate it because it's too powerful, it's too deep, and it's too elusive, and so all you can say about it is nothing. But there's a kind of deeper level of an answer. One second. There's a deeper level, which is that all of the, if you start at the lowest sphera and you look at the world around you, you can point to things that you can see, touch, smell, hear, feel. Though that is something. Now, the thing that we see, you, me, the clock on your wall, this annoying fan above my head, none of these things are ultimately real, right? These are all not elusive. What's the word? I mean, they're all going to fade, and none of them have any real substance because in 1,000 years that fan won't be there. It's nothing, but the word will still be there. But there's something to hold on to. As we go up the chain of creation, so to speak, and we begin to look for the real origin, there's no substance that we can hold on to that is like the source of all creation, right? Even like, just to take a little bit of an example, like people used to believe that the sun was like the source of all creation. Well, now we know that that's not the case. And then People thought the heavens were the creation and all the stars and everything, whatever it might be. You keep going, and the further you get from the created world, the further away from physicality you get. And what is it that's animating everything and making everything go? It's nothing, right? There is a reality to the name Ein. Nothingness is at the heart of all creation. You want to point to what is it that's animating everything. You take a tree, you tear it apart. What's underneath all of it? Nothing. Keep going down to the roots. What's down there? Nothing. Just keep going, and there's nothing, and yet the world still is. Does that make some level of sense? You're being generous. Okay, so there is a sense in which nothing really is at the source of creation. So I think that's the deeper level for the meaning of the word Keter. The meaning of the sphere Keter. But he's really wants us to talk about Chokhmah. So Chokhmah is its name is the opposite of Ein, because Keter is called Yesh. So Ein means nothing, Yesh means there is or being. Okay? Okay. Keep going, Sarah. It is the origin.
It is the origin of thought which flows, for the beginning of where the order of the Sephirot is perceivable originates with the second Sephirah, which is Chokhmah. And this is the place where one has access to request one's wishes. For even though it is not revealed, it is not completely hidden, as is the first Sephirah. The second Sephirah, which has limited accessibility for requests through the ever flow emanating from Keter, is called Yesh, being, or there is.
Okay, so he says something that a little bit contradicts what I said earlier, which is that Chokhmah is kind of totally beyond our capacity to access. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure. I think what he means here is we can almost touch Chokhmah because Bina, which is Teshuvah, is like, this close to Chokhmah. But in any event, so he's indicating it has this sort of liminal status. On the one hand, it's not revealed. On the other hand, we tap into it because it contains the design of all creation. And so as your mind goes up and up and up and away from the world of division and away from the world of materiality and multiplicity to the total unity, you begin to brush up against like the source of all creation, the plan of all creation, as it were, Chokhmah. Okay. In other words, you get to the very essence of Yesh, of being, of reality. Okay. We're not going to talk about that right now because that's very confusing. Okay. Let us go now to okay, somebody else want to read here? Will somebody else read here? Know that this is
the Hakma that is inseparable from Bina. For both of them are attached to the sphere Keter.
Sorry, yeah, he in the translation I have, it uses the word sphere, which is very not helpful. Yep.
Both of them are attached to the Sphirot Keter, which is in the realm of mercy, a place where there is no sadness, no misery, and no division. There is only glory, beauty, and grace. Because these two Sphirot, Hakma and Bina, are forever united, so too the name Yah never changes. If God forbid Israel sins and causes divisions between the lower Hakma and causes separation from Da'at, as it is written, a querulous one alienates his friends. Proverbs. Then the final Hey of the name separates from the preceding Vav. And when this happens to the Vav, then the Vav is gathered above and is no longer seen because her mate is separate from her.
Okay, let's pause there because this is a lot to take on. We're going to break this into little sections. So this first part is a little simpler, at least on the sentence level. Chokhmah is inseparable from Bina, right? They're bound, and so the name Yud Hey represents the unification of Chokhmah and Bina, because again, Yud is Keter and Chokhmah, and Hey is Bina, and Yah can never be broken. It stands alone as a name of God, whereas Vav Hey does not stand alone as a name of God. No one ever calls God Va. So Yah is a name that can, and so it's always there. No matter what happens to Vav and Hey, you still have the name God breathing life into the world. And Keter, we haven't really talked about this yet, but Keter is associated with mercy, with Rachamim, a place where there's no sadness or misery or division. There's only glory, beauty, and grace. I just think that's such a beautiful sentence. It's just gorgeous. Like the source of all things, the very first notion of creation is just pure goodness and desire to benefit creation. Okay, so that's one thing. Okay, next thought. Oh, sorry, I should have done, yeah. So the next thought is, because these two sefirot, Chokhmah and Bina, are forever united, so too the name of Yah never changes. We've talked about that a lot now. If, however, God forbid, Israel sins and causes divisions between the lower Chokhmah and causes separation from Da'at. Da'at, really, for our purposes here, we're just going to call this, I'm going to call this higher consciousness, okay? For right now, we're just going to let that be. It's not 100% accurate. So if Israel sins and causes a separation, then the final Hey of the name separates from the preceding letter Vav. What is the final letter Hey of the name? What sphera? Going.
Malkut.
Yeah, the final Hey represents Malchut, going back up here. Right, so Keter is the tip of the Yud, Chokhmah is the body of the Yud, Hey is Bina, Vav, which is the number 6, represents the 6 sefirot around Tiferet and Tiferet itself. And then Hey represents the world of Malchut, which is the realm of the divine that's closest to the created world, right? Malchut is sort of like infusing everything around us when we begin to raise our awareness to God's existence in the world, and we understand that there is a God, that we're already touching Malchut at that level. So therefore we associate Malchut with the created world. So when we, who kind of can access Malchut, when we sin and cause division, it's as though we're breaking off the Hey from the Vav. We're destroying the name. We're destroying the name itself. And so what does that mean, destroying the name? It doesn't mean the name. It means we're destroying creation. We're destroying the harmony of the divine and the earthly in the world. Because we're the letter Hey, like reaching up to the other sefirot. And when we sin and turn away, what it means to sin is to turn away. So he's not just describing the operation of the sefirot. He's actually giving you a definition, in a sense, for what sin is. Sin means to remove the Hey. Sin means to break Malchut off from the upper sefirot. Sin means to prevent the divine harmony from flowing into the created world. Okay, so right now we live in a world where the Hey of the name is not really unified with the upper sefirot, with the Vav. And so our task, it really is to restore the Hey. Our task in life is to address precisely what he's talking about, to bring the name into completion. okay? On that day, God will be one and God's name will be one, right? We are working to restore God's name.
So question, how is the Chachma and Bina connection, what does it have to do with the hay again?
Oh, good question. So Chochma and Bina, let's go back up here. Let's see, didn't I thought I wrote this out once, maybe not. Is there a good way for me to do this? Let's do this. Whoa. Okay. I probably should have done this a long time ago. So this is the Yud is Keter in Chochma. That's ugly. Keter in Chochma. Sorry for my sloppiness here. The Hey represents Bina. The Vav represents, who wants to walk me through it? What are all of the, what does the Vav represent? We'll start with Tiferet.
Chesed.
Yep, so
Chesed.
Chesed, Gevura,
Netzach,
Netzach,
Hod,
Hod,
Yesod.
Yesod. Sorry, that's very messy here, but we'll make it even smaller so we can see all those. Tiferet, Chesed, Gevura, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. That's six Sfirot. Now remember, in that one, then this is off topic of Joel's question, but Tiferet is in the middle and all the others surround it. Tiferet is the force that balances all of them. And then the Hey, this second Hey is Malchut. So, so Joel, the answer to you're asking a very big question. The answer is that the letters represent all of the 10 Sfirot. And so when Israel sins, we actually separate this letter from all of the upper, all of the upper Sfirot. So you just have these.
I guess I thought I heard you say that when you sin, we're breaking up the Chachma from the Bina, which is the Yud and the Hey.
I didn't mean to say
Maybe I must have just misunderstood. That's
right.
why I was kind of confused, because I thought those things Yud Hey can't be broken up
yeah,
ever.
Exactly. No, you're precisely right. The Yud Hey cannot be broken, right? And that's why he says, Vav Hey. He doesn't say it like this, but Vav Hey is not a name of God. No one has ever called God Vav Hey. And the reason for that is it can't stand alone. Yud Hey can stand alone. That's not the ideal state of the world, because really we want to unify everything. But Yud Hey will never cease. That God breathing goodness into the world and making possible the renewal of creation will never cease as a possibility. Okay, so sorry,
Okay.
I hope I didn't say that, because I certainly didn't mean to. Okay, now let's go back here. Where are we? That's not where we're going. Right. So so that's what happens when we sin. We break apart the name. So once the Shekhinah, which is the final Hey, is exiled, then the letter Vav is not even seen, and only Yah remains, the place where there is no division. Thus the verse says, because of the evil, the tzaddik is removed. We're not going to dwell on that too much. But what I wanted to emphasize here, and this is a little off topic, but it's off chapter, but it's on topic, is the fact that the Hey is Shekhinah. So Malchut and Shekhinah refer to the same divine dimension. So when the Shekhinah is broken off, one of the ways one of the things to realize is that, let me start over. Erase that sentence. What I'm trying to say is that we are deeply connected to Shekhinah. We are part of the divine name. So our lowest selves, our animal drives, our ego, in a sense, everything is part of God. But because God created all things, but when we begin to have a higher consciousness, we are an essential, we're not separate from God. We are part of the letter Hey. So this is a totally fundamental, in a sense, it's like Kabbalah 101, but it's very hard to grasp because it's so alien to our normal way, to the theology that you learned when you were in religious school. We are part of our higher consciousness is part of divine consciousness. So it's not like God took a child and then the analogy is not that a parent takes a child and leaves the child out in the desert and then says, "Come find me." That analogy doesn't work because the child is a separate being from the parent. We are ultimately not separate beings from Hashem. Our behavior makes us forget, through our behavior, we demonstrate that we're not aware of it or that we've forgotten it. But our goal is to take this divine stuff that we are in our minds and even in our bodies, and to make it cleave to the divinity that's in the world, to bring this part of God's name together with this part of God's name. But it's all part of God. Does that, you get that? Can you at least hear me? Okay. So anyway, so when he says, the reason I went off on that tangent is because of why did I say that? Where did it's down below. Yeah, because once the Shekhinah, which is the final Hey, is exiled, the letter Vav is not seen. So you might, the reason I said that is because one might be confused from the fact that up here it says, when Israel sins and causes division. Here, Israel sounds like it's separate from God. Here, we see that Israel sinning causes the separation. That's actually Shekhinah being separated. So Israel is Shekhinah. Okay, so Israel is yet another name, sometimes that's used for Malchut. Okay. I'm going to move on to yet a separate passage here. This is pronounced Omek, and it's Ayin Mem Kaf. They spell it, I've spelt it here with A-O because otherwise it looks like Amek, but it's pronounced Omek. But it starts with an Ayin, which is why I've got the letter A. Okay, so can we get another reader here, the Sphira?
The Sephira is also called Omek. Is that right? Omek?
Yep.
Meaning depth of thought. Do not be misled in thinking that Omek refers to something that is lowly, for the intention of the word. Word. Omek is marvelous and distant from our grasp, as it is written. What happens is elusive, and Omek.
Yeah.
Omek again.
Yeah. No. Here it's actually Amok. Yeah. So let's pause here. So, and it's obviously it's very difficult in the transliterations to capture it, but we'll go to the Hebrew in a second. Right here, all he's saying right here is that the word Omek literally means deep, right? So like here's the land, and then you have a deep hole. And he's just saying that doesn't mean lowly. When we say something is, just like in English, we say, wow, man, that's really deep. That doesn't mean it's like, wow, that's lame. It just means like, wow, that's very, very profound. And then here, what happened, this word amok, though it's translated differently because it's slightly different pronunciation. It's the same root, okay? And by the way, the word for valley in Hebrew is emek, right? Same root, emek, a low place, okay? But he's saying omek is like deep in the very best sense. Okay, keep going. Keep going here.
This is the essence of the verse from the Ma'amakim depths. I call to Yah.
Okay, so heavy duty. So here's where we start to get into some really cool verbal play. So let's go to Psalm 130. What was the 131? Okay. Okay, Shir Hama'alot. Don't worry about that part. Mi ma'amikim karaticha. And then the four-letter name of God. So usually when we read this, we read mi ma'amakim karaticha ya. We pronounce it as Yud Hey. So I'm a little puzzled to see this here. One second. Yeah. I don't know why they've printed the... Sorry, guys. I don't know why it doesn't say Yah here. In any event, what he's trying to do is to connect mim amikim. Here, that word amok that we saw is right there. Ayin, mem, kaf. Okay? From the depths, I call to Yah. So he's telling you that the word Yah is connected to the word ma'amikim, depths. Okay? Now, so now let's find out why that is. Read that verse, if you read this line, if you would, Lenny.
This refers to the omek of thought, which is the ratzon of the limitless infinite. In this fashion, it was stated in Sefer Yetzirah.
Okay, so let's pause there. So the omek, the depth of thought, that is the will of the Ein Sof, that is God's desire to create the world, that thought is so deep, right? God's designs are so profoundly deep that's why the Torah says, from the depths, from Chokhmah, I call out, from Chokhmah, right? Because in Chokhmah, we begin to try to discern, although we can't really access it, we try to discern the designs of God. And when we do that, we're at a very, very deep level. What does that practically mean when we say that we're like thinking in a deep way, or we're trying to connect to Amok, we're trying to connect to Chokhmah? Practically speaking, you might think of this as a form of meditation where you're trying to meditate, you're letting everything fall apart, and you're trying to connect to the unity behind all things, because the unity behind all things is really the Chokhmah, right? That is the design of the universe. So the Chokhmah, what's behind the design of the universe, is on the one hand a universe of multiplicity, but one that all comes from a single source. So if you can imagine yourself getting to that level of meditation where you begin to touch the unity of all things in your consciousness, you're beginning to touch Chokhmah, the energy that's behind or underneath all creation. Okay, I'm going to pause there because I don't want to take on this other huge paragraph before we, with the time that we have left. And let me just take questions, comments, clarifications, whatever it might be. Cheryl?
Do you know of like specific meditative practice that would be kind of prescribed to go to that level of OMEC or open to it?
Well, I'll tell you, this is a really great book. There are, I may have shared this book with you. There are a lot of really nonsense books out there, to put it nicely. Actually, that's not nice. Well, I said it wasn't nice. But I guess everyone's doing their best. That's the best way to look at it. But there are a lot of books that, in my mind, try to connect Kabbalah to practice and to meditation. And in my experience, the ones that I've encountered tend to really distort the Kabbalah and to simplify it, and they import practices from outside of the Jewish tradition, which doesn't offend me. But if somebody wants to know the Kabbalah, they want to know the Kabbalah. And the Dalai Lama can't really tell you about the Kabbalah because that's not his trip. So this book is so practical and so incredibly well informed about primary Jewish sources. So, and it has, my point is it has meditative practices, very specific meditative practices. So it's called I to the Infinite. And it's by, in my screen, I'm reading backwards, so I can't actually even see. Oh, sorry.
No, it's showing. And I'm sorry, there's something going by, so I hope people can.
Just search for the title. Just search for the title I to the Infinite, okay?
Sure.
Reuben, last name Reuben.
And I do want to say that I'm not asking this because I'm going to go and dive into trying to touch Chokhmah this afternoon, which I think would be foolish and dangerous. But I'm just, at this point, I'm just curious, are there practices that seem to be prescribed for
it is
specific?
I mean, look, no harm in you trying it even this afternoon. But yeah, get that book. It's pretty good. It's excellent. It's a superb book. Okay, questions, comments?
I'm going to go buy a tree to put right in front of me.
Right.
Ooh, one for upstairs, one for down.
Nice. Good. Awesome.
So, question that I would have, and I remember getting once some book like by the Zohar and trying to do some Kabbalah stuff years ago and kind of kicked my butt, and I just felt like I did not have the intelligence to do it. I wasn't part of this class the first couple of sessions, as you know. I've only caught a couple. So is there anything on like the Sefaria website where, I know it has that Kabbalah thing, one of the links, and it has a whole bunch of stuff that, as opposed to like every week, sometimes my brain just kind of loses it. Is there an online resource? And then it sounds as if, like, if I just wanted, you had mentioned before this book, I to the Infinite, if you just wanted to have a book, intro Kabbalah, I know there's different types, so something that kind of fits in with what you're teaching here, that's the book that you'd recommend to buy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a really good, it's difficult. It's a difficult question. I don't think there's any single volume that really can capture everything. I guess I would, between these two books, these are my two favorite books in English on the Kabbalah. This one is called Inner Space. This is out of publication, but it's not that expensive to find used. Inner Space by Aryeh Kaplan. And then the I to the Infinite is also pretty incredible. Now, one of the challenges, the reason I say there's no single volume is one of the challenges is that when somebody says, I want to study the Kabbalah, it's actually misleading, because that's like somebody saying, oh, I'm going to study art. Well, what are you going to study, like cave paintings from prehistoric France, or are you going to study Dada or whatever? It's like, it's just a general term. The accurate way to say it is there are Kabbalahs, plural. So So that's one thing. And then the other thing, the really tough truth, at least in my experience, is that it for my feeble brain, it takes repeated readings and readings and readings. And I still, as you can tell through sometimes not, sometimes you can tell through my teaching, there's still holes in my learning, and I've read a huge amount about it. So I'm not saying that to discourage you. I'm saying to encourage you just to, read this book and then read it again in a year. And in the interim, read several other books. And eventually the things start to make more sense. And you got to read carefully and be patient with yourself. So I think I was, another book that I wouldn't necessarily recommend. You're not going to hurt yourself reading it. It's good to read, but it can be very, very, it starts to get really strange. Is this book, 138 Openings of Wisdom. This is a primary source by the Ramchal. This is one of the most important books in Kabbalah. And he's trying to summarize the Kabbalah of the Ari. The other thing I would say, and I thought of this book because I really made the effort with this book, read as slowly as you have to understand it. We're so accustomed in our day and age just to like reading an article in 11 seconds because that's what we have. That doesn't work in Kabbalah. So I've spent, the little chapters in here are, and this book is all in English. The little chapters in here are broken up into like chapter 36 is 4 pages. I probably spent 5 hours reading that. So, just be patient and don't assume that, who knows, maybe it'll take you 3 years to read it. Maybe it won't, but just be patient and read a lot. It's very complicated, Kabbalah.
You're calling this class Gates of Light. Is that the same thing as in the Safari where it says Sha'arei Orah?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I kind of thought.
Yep. And they have not all of it, but some of it is in English on Safaria.
Okay.
Yes, Sarah.
Thank you.
Speaking of Safaria, I just wanted to reiterate what you said about possibly making a donation.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Reminder.
Yeah, did I say it at the beginning of this class or was?
I think so.
Oh no, that was in the Torah service. So when you go to Safaria is a totally free service, which is ludicrous because it has, if you were to buy all the books that you have access to on Safaria, it would cost you like, I don't know, $50,000 or something. So when I happened to go there this morning for the Torah service in our tefillah, I noticed that they were, asking for donations as they do periodically, and it's just encouraging folks to make a donation to Safaria. It's an amazing service to the Jewish world.
So as long as we're spending money, I'm just going to throw this out there, and maybe either Jemmy and or you would respond. I'm not sure we know anything about the high holidays yet.
Right.
Except that Robert and I went and ordered machzorim.
Great. That's a good start.
Also mention that here.
That's a great start. So, and by the way, we will, I think later in this week, be able to tell you a clear picture of what's happening with the Chagim. But owning Lev Shalem Machzor is definitely a good start. And I believe that the Rabbinic Assembly slashed the price of those things for the COVID period, if I'm not mistaken. So now I think they're like $29, which is not cheap, but they used to be like 70 or something like that.
So the Machzor is also going to be available in PDF form, and we're going to have a loaning opportunity where people can check out Machzors for the high holidays. So there'll be a day when people can come pick up.
But I would say which is awesome. And I would say to that, everybody should have a machzor at home, at least one machzor. And if that's financially beyond your grasp, then you should reach out to me. So even though you can loan one, even though you can find one on PDF, own a machzor. It's good. It's a good book to have.
Can I come back to the just for a minute? Because I'm more saying this because I want to hear it come out of my mouth than any other reason. But I wanted to come back to the Shekinah living in Malkut, or Shekinah being equivalent to Malkut. My understanding is more that Shekinah moves around, like Malkut is the description, but there's this kind of guidingness of Shekinah, where she travels up to Tiferet, and the Holy One comes down to Tiferet, and there's a meeting in Tiferet, especially at Shabbos. You know, where we take on another holy soul, and
Right.
so I just kind of wanted to throw that in because I think it's more accurate.
Okay. I think that may be, I mean, first, as I said before, there are Kabbalahs, plural, and I haven't heard what you just said. I think that to the extent that the Shekhinah travels, in my understanding, and I'm not saying what you said is incorrect, but I just a separate understanding that I've been exposed to, is that Shekhinah is associated with Malchut, at least in his telling and in much of the Kabbalah. And to the extent that it travels, it has to do with that even though Malchut is most closely associated with the physical world and therefore with our consciousness, that by no means assures that we're connected to Malchut or Shekhinah throughout the course of our lives, because we can lose focus and connection to Shekhinah by being caught up in ego and illusion and all of the rest, and not being aware of God's presence and the unity of all being. When we tune into that, we are being embraced by Shekhinah because we're touching Malchut. But again, there are other renderings, and I'm not going to, there are many different ways that people talk about the Kabbalah. So what you just said is entirely possible, but not something I'm familiar with.
Rabbi?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is when you're reading so on, you come across people's names, Rabbi, so this scholar or that rabbi, and they're talked of as this one is a Kabbalist and this one is not.
Yeah.
Is that what makes someone a Kabbalist and someone not?
That's a
or is the distinction meaningful much at all?
That's a good question. I think it's meaningful. I think it just means that a Kabbalist is just somebody who studies and practices the kind of thing that we're talking about, and somebody who doesn't study the Kabbalah is not a Kabbalist.
So there's nothing really formal about it at all.
Well, I mean, in the sense that, there is a little bit. I mean, to me, it's like, it's the analogy is imperfect, but I know I do think there's something formal about it. When somebody says again, it's an imperfect analogy, but if somebody says that they are an artist or a physicist, what does that mean? It means that they spend their time engaged with art or physics, right? And that they
perhaps the artist one is more apt here than the physicist, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
A physicist, you would assume a degree or some other, but artist, anyone can really be an artist. So it's more like the artist.
That's nice, and also similarly, as in art, like we've all met people in our lives who are like, yeah, I'm an artist, and you're like, okay. Really, yeah. Right? And what that means is they just started, they just set pencil to paper for the first time last week. Like, good for them, but I'm saying there are artists and then there are artists. So there are Kabbalists and there are Kabbalists. So this is another answer to your question. Sometimes when somebody says he's a Kabbalist, they mean like, oh yeah, that guy sort of, he likes to meditate and he sometimes studies that kind of stuff. And other times when they say he's a Kabbalist, they mean like that guy's really like a master teacher, or he's a master student of the Kabbalah. Now, generally for that, when you hear somebody referred to as a Makubal it comes from the same word as Kabbalah, which you can hear. Generally, a Makubal means like this guy is a heavy duty source of Kabbalistic teaching. That's a whole, he's a serious Kabbalist, like Luzzatto he was a Makubal, right? But so yeah, I would say it does have concrete meaning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there, I guess, corollary question, can there be observant Jews who just don't buy the whole thing of Kabbalah at all?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm not 100% fit to answer it.
That wouldn't be me, by the way.
But I think that the answer, so the answer used to be yes. The answer used to be clear, like when I say used to, I mean a hell of a long time ago, like, hundreds of years ago, before the advent of the Kabbalah of the Ari, there were Jews who were not Kabbalists. I don't know. Certain Orthodox Jews would disagree with what I'm saying here, but nowadays I think that, well, yeah, you know what? I think the short answer is I don't really have a clear answer. Kabbalah is so widely studied now, and it's so much even a part of our prayer book. Right? Lecha Dodi is a Kabbalistic poem. And in the Sha'arei Orah, the passage that we read on Shabbat, El Baruch Gadol De'ah Hechin Avar Zarachama. I don't know if you remember, there's this acrostic passage of the Sha'arei that's totally a Kabbalistic passage. The poem El Adon, which is also in the Sha'arei prayer on Shabbat, is totally Kabbalistic. So at some point the distinctions become less meaningful. But I will say this, which is not really answering your question, but it's a riff on your question that maybe sheds some light. Some people have in mind that there are, that Orthodoxy and Kabbalah are like separate, that the people who practice Kabbalah are the guys who like twirl around and wear big kippot, and the Orthodox guys wear the tiny kippot, and then never the two shall meet. Well, when you start to look at some of the masters of some of the great minds of Orthodoxy who authored some of the great legal codes, for example, you find out that they were all Kabbalists. So part of the distinction is who talked about it openly and who didn't. And so when there was the disagreement in early Hasidism, I don't know if you're aware of this, that there's this idea that among the early Hasidim, they were really hated by like the Litvaks, like the kind of law studying, Talmud studying, kind of mainstream Orthodox establishment really objected to what the Baal Shem Tov was doing and his students were doing. And people sometimes are misinformed and believe that what they didn't like is they didn't like this Kabbalah stuff that the Baal Shem Tov was teaching. That's actually not it at all, because everybody was studying the Kabbalah. And so the arguments were about other things. So I don't know if that helps illuminate it at all.
It does. I'm kind of exploring the idea that maybe Kabbalah, in some sense, is a place to hang the mitzvah or the law on.
Yeah, well, I think it gives a framework for understanding the Ta'amei mitzvot, for the reasons for the mitzvot, for sure. It's not a framework everybody accepts or believes, but there's something very, very important about what you're saying, which maybe next time, if you can remind me, it's actually something really well worth talking about. And I think there's something very profound and a little bit quote unquote dangerous about that. Not about what you said, but what you said is a topic that's very fraught among Kabbalists and among non-Kabbalists. And I believe it explains why people were so reticent to recommend the study of Kabbalah to people who are unprepared for it. But that's a topic for another time. Joel and then Lenny.
If being from the Orthodox world, so to speak, I remember back probably about 40 years ago when I was a teenager in a young Israel. I've been to a couple of different young Israels.
You just went mute. You just went, okay, so go ahead.
You hear me now?
Now I can, yeah.
Okay. And, I remember whether it was in yeshiva, even the younger people, maybe you would think we'd be more cutting edge. No one talked about the Kabbalah. I remember in the shul, it's just like the Kabbalah was kind of like, that's like crazy stuff. And it wasn't for a few years later that I found out my uncle, who actually passed away about a year or so ago, he had a small crew, and he was a Holocaust survivor, heavily into Kabbalah, with these 5 or 6 men that I then found out, like all the other dads, would talk about them as to how like extreme that was that they were doing this study of Kabbalah.
That's very cool.
And it really wasn't until I think like 20 years ago where it became really kind of more in hip that now it's part of the vernacular. I mean, I don't really know. I should probably call one or two old friends of mine who are still in the yeshiva Orthodox world to see, you know, if Kabbalah is a major part of the young Israel now. You have me kind of curious.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, the difference was about who talked about it openly and who didn't. And it used to just be like, yeah, right, you study Kabbalah quietly on Shabbos with a small group of people, but you don't go out and try to explain it because you can't really explain it well to people who are not committed to the path of halakha. Lenny, you're on mute, brother.
I put a link in the chat. I came across this late last night, like 2 a.m., and I didn't have a chance to read it, but it's from Chabad, and I assume that it's Kabbalistic, but
okay.
I'll have to take a
Derech
look on it.
Mitzvotecha. Okay, cool. I don't know that Sefer. But yeah, there are several Kabbalistic books on there. By the way, sorry, another source, I should have mentioned him. Another incredible source, if not like the greatest English source for understanding Kabbalah, is Daniel Matt. Daniel Matt, I first encountered Daniel Matt through, I don't know, some book that was intended for like a wide audience, and I sort of assumed he was kind of a flaky guy, and this guy's like one of the heaviest hitters that there is. So he translated the Zohar, the Pritzker edition of the Zohar. If you just Google Pritzker Zohar or Daniel Matt Zohar, you'll find it. It's in, I don't know, 12 volumes. I think he only worked on up through volume 9 or 10. But it's a beautiful translation. It's a beautiful printing, and his notes are awesome. And he's an incredible living resource of understanding Kabbalah. And he because he's an academic, he's an unusual kind of guy, because on the one hand he's an academic, and so you might think that he's just kind of in the ivory tower and interested in these obscure questions about the Kabbalah, which sometimes happens in academia. But he's actually, in his translation of the Zohar, it seems to me that he's really trying to reach an audience of people who are trying to make the Kabbalah work in their lives. Maybe he's, I don't know whether he's a traditional guy or not, but great integrity intellectually, but also really a profound desire to convey the teachings to people who don't have fluency in the original texts. So, and he's written a whole bunch of books. If taking on the whole translation of the Zohar is too much, I would recommend any title from him. Okay, so listen, I could feel as we were doing this, I was not sufficiently prepared. I was getting caught up in my own words today, and I apologize for that, because this stuff is confusing enough as it is. You don't need a teacher who's tripping over his own words. So give me a couple weeks to get back in the saddle, and hopefully I can illuminate some of these things that are obscure, at least the things I understand, and the things that I don't understand, I won't pretend that I do. So I hope you have a great day, and be well. Thank you.